Thanks for joining me at the Underground tonight. It's time to get prepared, everyone.
So, during the last few months, the global economy has been in turmoil, and a great number of people are blaming the financial meltdown on this pandemic outbreak. However, in the last 2 weeks, a lot of that blame sentiment has been shifting, and a lot of citizens are starting to blame the government with all the lockdowns, industry shutdowns, and the way they've been phasing us into the reopening process. Now, recent reports are starting to be published that the financial crisis here in America started 5 months before the first death caused by this pandemic. And if you remember, back in September, that's when the Federal Reserve started cutting interest rates. That's when they started these repo injections. And a lot of things in the economy started to turn upside down. Now, this pandemic has definitely been really scary. But something you might not be thinking of is we should really be frightened of the way the government handled it. You know, without any discussion, votes, or anything, they literally forced us to stay in our doors. In some states, they controlled what you buy. And what I mean by that is certain items they wouldn't let you buy. If it wasn't deemed essential, I know in the state of Vermont, you couldn't buy it. And that list included things like books and clothes and gardening supplies, just a whole bunch of random things that they wouldn't let you buy. So that's very scary to see how they could really take our liberties and freedoms away without us even saying or getting a say-so on it whatsoever. Now, financial columnist Pan Martin and Russ Martins explained in a report that the economic carnage started 5 months before the pandemic started. For instance, the Martins detail that the first death in China was reported on January 11th, 2020, but the signs of the economic meltdown started on September 17th, 2019. And in fact, if you remember, the Federal Reserve gave primary dealers a massive $6.6 trillion before the first death was even reported of this pandemic. Now, the first signals that started showing signs in the U.S. economy's failure were in September 17, 2019. And that's when the New York Fed announced that it was intervening in the repo loan market for the first time in Wall Street since Wall Street's crash in 2007. The report written by Martins highlights that the Fed will provide a maximum of $75 billion per day to 24 Wall Street trading houses, with a cap of $40 billion going to any one firm. Now, if you remember, they started out at $40 billion, then the next cap went up to $75 billion, and then they increased it to $120 billion by November 9th, 2019. So that right there shows as they started injecting money, they had to keep increasing it because there was no liquidity. And if they didn't, this economy would have completely crumbled back in September or November, October, December, whatever, way before this pandemic started. And I think a lot of people are forgetting about that and the severity of it. With all these riots and then the worry about a second wave of this pandemic coming, people are getting distracted and forgetting that one of the core problems that could definitely damage the way we live and change our, what's the word I'm looking for? The way we live, the status of our living, is a massive economic meltdown here in America. And we've been living above our means for a long time here because we have the reserve currency. And as we're printing more and more of this money, it's watering it down. It's going to make it less valuable. And these things take time to happen. It doesn't just happen instantly. As we go down the road and we keep printing this money, if this money actually hits Main Street, it's going to be insane how bad inflation's going to spiral out of control. Now, what's really upsetting was the fact that 2019 was one of the best years for Wall Street as stocks hit record high numbers. The world's wealthy elite grew massively in 2019. And in the Wealth X report specifically cites that the Fed's stimulus program as a direct primer of the stock market and the growth of very high net worth, meaning that the Fed's pumping money just made the rich even richer. While us average working Americans stayed the same. The central banks have literally become the primary driver of the wealth inequality here in America. And what we were doing back then isn't even close to what we're heading into and what we're doing now. It's only going to make things worse. And this is why we need to get prepared. This is why you need your food, water, security, community, and your precious metals. Precious metals are what's going to help us get through an economic downturn and an economic collapse. These metals are waiting to explode. And the wealthy know this. And you better believe that they got them. And central banks are even starting to accumulate more now too with everything going on. They hit record numbers last year and they're starting to do it again. So I want to wrap this up, but I want to remind you guys why precious metals are so important and remind you that we can't really trust this government anymore. They're not going to tell us the truth. This economy was on shaky grounds way before this pandemic. That was the truth. Back in September when we started, cutting interest rates, which we did 3 times last year, and now we're at 0 to 0.25, isn't what happens in the greatest economy in American history. And we did all that before this pandemic. I could go on and on between the repo market, store closures. A lot of you already know this information. But it definitely wasn't because of this pandemic that our economy is falling. Now that we're in it and we're closing businesses and forcing them to stay closed and they had to close for months, yeah, it sped things up a lot and definitely hurt a lot of businesses and people in this economy, but that just fed it. It fed onto it and it triggered it. It was already happening. So please stay safe out there. And please, everybody, keep prepping. Have a good night.